Vijay, same question to you. I mean, if as an academic you were to, because you were there. I mean, you were there in the UK. I mean, you
Very
and I
much.
met at Portsmouth. Uh, how do you look at the narrative has changed also? Over a period of time, every passing couple of years, Professor Lekha makes this very important point about Brexit. Has the narrative changed with political evolution or political change? And has that impacted London's legacy, Vijay Pereira?
Yeah, I think I 100% agree with Ben here that it has changed for the worse. I mean, 2012 we were celebrating it big time. That was supposed to be a success. 4 years later, I think Brexit 2016, and thereafter, I think we've gone back. The UK has gone back to nationalism, and it's not the only country across the world we witness nationalism. Now, nationalism to an extent is good, but overdoing it is as we see, harmful. And I think the UK is right now struggling, and we hope the Paris Olympics leads it to come closer, because sport has always been unifying, and it's quite strange that 10 years down we sit in Olympic Village where we see multiculturalism and all of that. But really, things are gone from bad to worse, and we hope it's going to go back, and some sense prevails overall.
And I can sense a bit of a kind of gloom in what both of you are telling me. But when I look at, say, the UK sports story, one medal, one gold in 96, and then 29 or 30 in London, and then obviously Rio, even Tokyo, London was the real success story of British sport. Isn't that important at all in this larger sport narrative? Because you need sporting success for sport to be commercially successful.
You absolutely do. And from a medal count, by way of looking at how impactful the game was, the UK was extremely successful and was able to compete with the likes of the United States and China, which typically are always going to be the large medal winners. So you could argue from the size of the nation, they certainly overperformed. Although I think if you look at data, typically the home nation of any Olympics will always overperform somewhat. I think where the UK may suffer in comparison to other nations is the appetite for amateur sport, of which typically the Olympics is, has to compete for sponsorships, for commercial endeavours, for the interest of the public with its professional sports. And of course the UK, home to one of the largest sporting franchises in the world, the English Premier League. There is so much appetite, so much attention, always has been, on that particular product, and it is so successful, not just in Europe, but around the world. If you have children and young people, are you going to convince them to grow up and be an Olympic runner versus a footballer? Has the Olympics changed that? I don't necessarily think it has, because of how dominant and how competitive things like football and rugby and cricket, and there is a huge abundance of other sports that wouldn't have been featured at the games. So where other nations may not necessarily have that, and they might import football franchises, and they will be televising football and rugby and cricket from other places in the world, at least they then have an identity which is completely defined with a particular Olympic sport. So for example, you look at Russia and you look at gymnastics, they culturally are quite intertwined and quite close, but from the UK's perspective, they never have been so close to one particular sport, because football is the national sport, rugby coming in second, and you might then argue, depending on who you speak, golf, cricket coming in third or fourth, and then tennis. So at what point does the games actually capture long-term the imagination of children and young people? I think that's a question for legacy, and I think if you look at, say, other nations, you might find it's quite low in comparison.
Okay, 10 years from the London 2012 Games, we are in 2022. Vijay, from the participatory sports standpoint, I mean, very important. I remember Professor Lekha making this point about amateur sport. How do you see London? I mean, is the legacy positive? Is there anything like positive legacy? Can we estimate a legacy 10 years down the line? How do you look at it?
Yeah, I think it's also about sporting heroes. I mean, Ben mentioned previously about Sir Mo Farah. So really, it is about one sporting hero. Before that, we had several others in athletics. Sir Sebastian Coe, for example. And so I think it's about these sporting heroes inspiring a whole generation with their accolades and with what they do. But I'm with Ben on this, that what is the traditional sport that can now be put aside and somebody gets into athletics. Now the UK has been also, Ben, I think you forgot to talk about hockey, India's national game, which has declined, where cricket has taken over, but then we're trying to bring it back. But I think also the London Olympics showed cycling coming very much to the fore. And a lot of medals were won in cycling. And of course, we could say boxing.
That was the lottery funding story, wasn't it? I mean, the whole Victoria Pendleton story, the 1997 funding story. That was the bigger pic. That was the story in London, wasn't it? I mean, the fruition of that whole lottery funding coming in.
Yes, but also the whole fact again of how London was sponsored by the chemical giant, isn't it? That was responsible for the Bhopal tragedy that killed several people. And so again, there is this connection of bad legacy, as you mentioned, in terms of the business partner sponsoring the London Olympics. There were a lot of strikes, and then again, there were talks about how Sebastian Coe's ancestors came from Bhopal, which were the sponsors going forward. So I think the link between also a lot of sporting events such as the Olympics and its link to businesses become very important.
So Professor Lekha, if I look at the IOC Reforms Commission document, say the 2001, 2021, and there is this whole emphasis about a mega event no longer being restricted to one city. It should be the country's games rather than the city's games. How do you look at the London games? Is it London's games, or can I look back and say, oh, you know what, it was the UK's games? I mean, how will Birmingham be, for example? The recent Commonwealth Games spread to Solihull, spread to Coventry, spread to all of these parts, and it's Leamington Spa. How do you look at London?
I think it will depend on who you're talking to. I think if you talk to a local Londoner, they will absolutely tell you that was Stratford's games, that was East London's games, and then it was London games. If we talk to someone outside of London, they will tell you that was the UK's games. So it's typically, I think, around identity and specifically national identity in terms of how close from proximity they are to the area that Vijay and I are today. But they will find ways to positively identify with that, which certainly shows you that they want to be identified with it. It's not something, for example, like the Brexit vote, where people are, depending on how they voted, but typically trying to disassociate themselves with that. With the games, it's still fondly remembered. I think for many people, that was the first in a generation that the games had come home, and they will be absolutely looking forward to that. And hopefully one day it will come home again for them.